Today on the rap sheet, we're breaking down a moment in the Young Thug saga that didn't get the headlines it deserved, but legally speaking, it's one of the most important developments in the entire YSL case. After years of fighting the state of Georgia, Young Thug has officially gotten back the property that was seized during his Rico indictment. The cash, the cars, the jewelry, the firearms. But this isn't just a quote win for Thug. This is a legal turning point that exposes weaknesses in the state's case, calls out prosecutorial overreach, and puts a spotlight on how civil forfeiture is used and abused in Georgia. Now let's get into it. When the YSL Rico indictment dropped, Georgia law enforcement moved fast. They seized roughly $150,000 in cash, multiple luxury vehicles, high-value jewelry, and several firearms. Now, all of this was taken through civil forfeiture, not criminal forfeiture. And that distinction matters. Civil forfeiture lets the government take your property without a conviction, sometimes even charging you for doing it. The property itself is treated like the suspect. In Thug's case, the state tried to argue that these assets were tied to criminal activity. But when it came time to prove it, the case fell apart. A Fulton County judge dismissed the forfeiture case outright. Well, why? Because the state failed to meet basic legal requirements that botched its own appeal by not ordering the required transcript. Even though the property was seized during the YSL investigation, the judge made something very clear. The civil forfeiture case stands on its own. The state cannot use the Rico indictment as a blanket excuse to hold assets forever. This reinforces a fundamental legal principle. Criminal charges and property rights are a separate battle. The state must win both, and in this battle, they lost. Georgia prosecutors often use civil forfeiture as leverage, especially in big, sprawling Rico cases like Young Thug's. But this ruling sends a message. You don't get to seize property indefinitely. You don't get to drag your feet. You don't get to hold someone's assets hostage while you figure out your case. The judge ordered everything returned by a hard deadline. That is the court reasserting due process in a system that often ignores it. This case is now being talked about as a bellwether movement for civil forfeiture reform in Georgia because it exposes how easily the state can take property, hold it for years, fail to prove anything, and still face almost no consequences. Thug's win highlights the imbalance of power and how rare it is for someone to actually get their property back. Most people don't have the resources to fight the state for years. Thug did, and the court sided with them. Even though Thug ultimately pleaded guilty in the Rico case, this property ruling is a post-conviction victory that matters. It undercuts the idea that everything seized was, quote, evidence of crime. If the state truly believed that, they would have fought harder. They would have perfected their appeal. They would have presented evidence, and they didn't. And that weakens the broader narrative that YSL was a criminal enterprise from top to bottom. This ruling doesn't rewrite the case, but it does expose the overreach behind it. Young Thug getting his property back isn't just a footnote. It's a legal moment that reveals cracks in the state's strategy, highlights the dangers of civil forfeiture, and reminds us that even in a massive Rico prosecution, the government's power has limits. This is the rap sheet where the culture meets the courtroom and where we break down stories the headlines don't tell. If you want a follow-up episode breaking down how civil forfeiture works or how this ruling could affect future Rico cases, just let me know. Until then, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for tuning into the rap sheet where the culture meets the courtroom.